everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I am here in my Sanditon t-shirt to wrap up what I read this month, mostly for Jane Austen July. However, there are a couple non-Jane Austen related books that I will get to at the end of the video. July was a fantastic reading month in terms of sheer number of books read, which was a really pleasant surprise considering the amount of due dates and deadlines that I ended up having. I really wasn't sure how this reading month was going to go, but it really turned out quite well. So like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to start with my Jane Austen July reads and then get into unrelated reads. So first of all, the group read for the main novel was Sense and Sensibility. So of course I reread Sense and Sensibility, which was really lovely. I haven't read it since 2016, so it was high time for a reread. Of course I liked it, as always. I did see that this was one of her earlier works as compared to her later works. I could really feel this time that there wasn't very much of a balance of prose versus dialogue in a lot of the chapters. It tended to be all prose and then all dialogue. Whereas with her later books, as with any author, she tended to interweave things a little bit more. But still wonderful. Had some wonderful chats with my mother about some of the characters. And of course, to go with our reread, we watched a screen adaptation. I thought we were going to watch both versions of Sense and Sensibility, but we ended up just watching the 2008 miniseries, which I had seen many, many times because it came out when I was in my late teens. I watched it a lot when I was away at university, but my mother really hadn't seen it, possibly ever, certainly not in a long time. And it was really wonderful. Of course, I still love the '95 film. That was my gateway into Austen. And I love everyone involved in that film. But I do really appreciate that A, the miniseries had actors who were closer to the characters' actual ages, and B, that they included more of the story. They had more time to play with, so they could include more of the story, and it was a really fun evening running through that. Then for the short works, I also participated in the group reads, which were the Watsons and Sanditon, which I have in this bind-up volume. And again, I really enjoyed both. I did read Sanditon probably the most recently, after watching season 1 of the television series and thinking, what the heck are they doing? I did go back and reread it, but I read it again this year. And it was good. There was her usual characterization, and as usual, I wish she had been able to continue with it. And the same for the Watsons. I was really pleasantly surprised by the Watsons and how much I wanted that story to continue. Of course, being unfinished, they weren't as polished because she hadn't edited them. Why would she? But you could still see her trademark characterization, her snide remarks, and just wish she'd finished them, but alas. Then for my nonfiction, I finally read Jane Austen's England by Roy and Leslie Adkins. This has a different title in the UK, which I can't remember, but the authors are still the same, and the cover is very much the same. And this is exactly what it sounds like. It's a nonfiction book detailing what daily life was like during the Georgian and Regency periods in which Jane Austen lived. And they divide them into subcategories, such as wedding bells, breeding, toddler to teenager, home and hearth, so on and so forth, all the way to last words. So it's really a comprehensive overview. I found it pretty readable, and I loved that they included so many extracts from extant diaries and journals and legal writing from the period to illustrate any point that they were making. That was a really fun insight. Then for my work by a contemporary of Austen's, I tried to read Waverley by Sir Walter Scott, and I couldn't do it. I had to DNF it. I got 5 chapters in, and not one word of dialogue had been spoken. Not even with free indirect discourse. It was 5 solid chapters of exposition and lots of people with the same name. And it didn't seem to be getting us anywhere either. And I just wasn't excited to go back to it and see if anything changed. And I thought, why am I putting myself through this? Don't bother. So instead, I picked up another Eliza Haywood. I realize Eliza Haywood falls slightly ahead of Jane Austen, but she is someone whose works Austen probably would have read. So this one is The Mercenary Lover, which is a tiny little novella about exactly that. It's about 2 sisters, one of whom marries an extremely greedy man who wants to have his cake and eat it too, in terms of both the sisters and their money and their fortunes, which, considering certain elements of Sense and Sensibility, I thought kind of tied in rather nicely. I don't know if, I don't want to say his name, but the husband slash brother-in-law could be considered a direct template for Willoughby or Wickham, because while they do terrible things to the women that they supposedly love, this guy takes the cake, and he takes it to a whole new level, which is both really shocking and also kind of funny in the way that 18th century literature tends to do. So if you do get the chance to check out any of her work, I would recommend this, or indeed any of her others. Then we hit the Austen retelling, and in terms of books, I have several for this prompt. The first was The Perils of Lady Catherine de Bourgh by Claudia Gray. This is the 3rd in her Mr. Darcy and Miss Tilney mystery series, so I can't tell you too much about what has led up to this one, although it's not as interconnected as the first 2 are. But here we still follow the son of the Darcys and the daughter of the Tilneys, as they are once again brought together to try and solve a mystery. Although this time it's not exactly a murder. They receive a summons from Lady Catherine de Bourgh because she is convinced that someone is trying to kill her. And so she orders her great-nephew and his friend to come in and head this off, find out who is doing it. And both my mother and I read it, and again, it generated really interesting conversation. The main thing being how much we can't stand Mr. Darcy in this, Mr. Darcy Sr., that is. And that his transformation throughout Pride and Prejudice doesn't seem to have lasted very long. I have always been more of a Knightley and Tilney fan myself, and this is kind of proving me right. But other elements were lots of fun. It's always fun to see where authors see various characters headed after Pride and Prejudice ends, and this was no exception, although the mystery I did find a bit lackluster. The revelation of who did it, not that exciting. Then I also read 2 other arcs that also fit this prompt. The first was A Lady's Fortune by Jane Austen, and this is her 4th Regency romance novel, I think. This one is fairly clean. There's a little bit of something at the end, but it is also very much closed door. So I always like to put those out there for romance books, just in case it is important to you. Since Jane is a historian, the accuracy and detail in her novels is always fantastic, and I very much appreciate that. I didn't really love the plot of this one, though. You could see where it was going very quickly, and I didn't feel like the stakes were terribly high at any point either. It was fun, it was cute. I think her 3rd was much better. The other arc I read that fit this prompt, however, was If I Loved You Less by Amna Qureshi. And this is a modern day adaptation of Emma, except that it's taking place among a couple Pakistani Muslim families living on Long Island. I was so excited to read this one, and it did not disappoint. You could read this as an ordinary contemporary romance novel and absolutely love it. The characters are just sweet and lovely. The plot is not adventurous or exciting, but you still feel like there are stakes to this. However, if you have read and loved Emma, you will get even more out of it, even more out of the character parallels and the plot point parallels that Qureshi manages to draw. My only tiny complaint is that it claimed to be set on Long Island, but honestly, we didn't see much of the setting. It could have been set anywhere. I realize that I am biased in terms of I live quite close to Long Island. I still have family on Long Island, so I am extremely familiar with it. For readers who live further away and don't really know Long Island, maybe you would feel better about it. But that is a small complaint to have for this wonderful of a book. Then for my Austen adaptation or spinoff, I thought I was just going to count the fact that I came across Clueless on TV one day early in the month, but then a few days ago, I was looking into Ostentatious, which, if you haven't heard of it, is an improv group that creates an entire 90-minute performance in the style of Jane Austen, but completely improvised. And they've had a very successful series of shows in the UK. I believe they are firmly settled in the West End at the moment. And so I'd been seeing their stuff for ages, and I saw the fact that they were advertising a DVD. So I went to look into it going, should I invest in that multi-region DVD player I've been thinking about? And discovered, no, it's not exactly a DVD. It's a download, a digital download for £10. And I was so excited. So I bought it and I watched it, and it was fantastic. It had all my favorite bits that I have ever seen or had sent to me on Instagram, and they did a fantastic job. The comedy was spot on. Any little quirk or inside joke that they brought up was not dropped from beginning to end. And yet the stakes were really high, and you really cared about these characters and you wanted them to end up happy. And it was clearly done with so much love for the original subject, and I just adored it. I'm so glad that I have it and that I was able to watch it. Now we get to my non-Jane Austen July reads, and the first thing I read that was not Jane Austen related in any way was A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas, which is the final, as of yet, book in the Court of Thorns and Roses series. I realize there are more coming, but it's the last one we have right now. And this was an interesting read. It is certainly the longest of the bunch, and it is probably the most divisive of the series. People either really love it or they really hate it. I'm sort of in a middle ground. I started out not really liking it. I recognize that Maas wanted to really explore Nesta's resentment, the trauma that she had been through in books 2 and 3, and that is important. But living in that negative space for so long was beginning to really wear on me. However, as you see her start to progress, start to believe in herself, start to create healthier habits, start to create friendships, I felt a lot better about it, and it felt a lot more like the fun comfort read that the rest of the series has been. They left it in such a place that I don't know where the next book is going to go, and I do feel like certain plot points at the end were wrapped up very quickly, but by and large, it was a solid read. Then I had another arc to read this month, which I will just briefly mention, and that was A Lady of Conscience by Mimi Matthews. And I won't give you a massive summary or my thoughts here because I just posted a review video as part of my deal with the publisher and access to this arc. So if you're curious about my thoughts, go and check that video out and that will tell you more. But suffice to say that it was a Victorian romance novel and very clean, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Then also in July, my hold on Beach Read by Emily Henry came in, so I had to read it before that expired because there was no way I was going to be able to get it back further down the line with the kind of waiting list that Emily Henry books tend to have. So I did race through this book, but it was a fun, light summer read. And I have to say, I think I enjoyed it more than People We Meet on Vacation, which, to be fair, are the only two that I've read so far. This one follows two writers who knew each other in college, university. They've grown apart, moved to different areas, but they end up living next door to each other for the summer. And they're both feeling pretty frustrated with what they're trying to write. So they challenge each other to try and write a book in the other's genre as a kind of challenge and say, see, doing my job is harder than you think it is. So our heroine must try to write dark, harrowing literary fiction, very much a la A Little Life or something along those lines. And our hero has to try and write a contemporary romance novel. And throughout research trips and encouraging each other through their writing process, they begin to rekindle what might have been in college. The reason why I say I liked this better than People We Meet on Vacation is that we got a lot more character development in the present moment. I really got to see them grow with each other. They had a lot of really vulnerable and honest conversations, and I really got to know them better as people and understand why they were falling for each other the way they were. There is definitely a spice element to Emily Henry's books, FYI, but as I don't mind that at all, I found this one a really enjoyable read. Then finally I managed to sneak away to a local beach for the day, and I had to bring something with me, so I ended up reading Sex with Kings by, I believe, Eleanor Herman, which is a nonfiction book about royal mistresses throughout the centuries. And looking at various aspects of their lives. What did kings look for in a mistress? What exactly was their job? How did the queens tend to feel about this? How did the mistresses' husbands tend to feel about this, as a lot of them tended to be married women? And it was really interesting. It was really fascinating. It was written in a very readable style. Some of the tidbits I knew already from other biographies or historical pieces that I've read. Other facts were really quite new, which was really interesting. And she has written another book as well, I believe, about liaisons to queens as well, so flipping the genders and looking at that dynamic as well, which I would be interested to read, but I highly recommend this one if it is of interest to you. It does tend to be slightly sexually explicit though, just because of the content. It has to be. So that is everything that I read and or watched during the month of July. Again, mostly for Jane Austen July, but a few others managed to sneak in there. And I almost forgot one other project, is that I made myself my own little Jane Austen. And I was hoping she could sit on these shelves behind me now, but she's a bit too tall to fit in these spaces, so I don't know how I'm going to manage that, but she is here watching over my books. And I thought it was only appropriate to show her off for Jane Austen July. Let me know down below what you managed to read this month, whether it was for Jane Austen July or not. If you have any books to recommend to me, if you think I would enjoy them, or if you read any of my recommendations and what you thought of them. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.